this morning to our session on the Black Catholic Imagination. We're so glad that you joined us today. I am here simply to introduce our speakers and then to step aside and let them do their thing. I think they've allowed for conversation afterwards, so I'll stand here and point to whoever raises her hand first. And with that, I guess we'll just proceed. Carolyn, Timone, who's going first?
I am.
Thank you. Well, please step up front. This is Timone Davis. She's a local talent from Loyola, Chicago. And I'll let her tell you about herself.
Oh, wow. I get to do an intro, too? Yeah, I
think we should self-define.
Wow. And you also are timing me, aren't you? Yes. How much time did you give me for?
Everybody's got like 20 minutes.
I have 20 minutes?
I think so. No? 50.
I have 15? I have 15. All right. Quick intro, because 15 minutes doesn't give me the amount of time that I want to use for whatever it is I want to do. So I'm Timone. I work at the Institute of Pastoral Studies at the Water Tower campus, and anything else you want to know about me, you can go online and Google it, and I can get right into what it is that I want to do. And so what it is that I want to do is talk about a woman. Now, I know in the Catholic Church, we really are not supposed to talk about people, but I do kind of like to talk about people, particularly this particular woman, because she kind of resonates with me in a way that, well, perhaps she might resonate with you. And so let me just dive into her story a little bit while we chat. It's a hot day. Very hot at this particular time. And the woman begins her journey by gathering her things at her spot so that she can go to the well to get the water that she needs because she is thirsty. But it's a journey that she's done many times, but it is always fraught with, hiccups and things like that, because this woman goes to the well alone. She doesn't go to the well with the other women who went earlier in the day when it wasn't hot, because she's not one of them. And they've made it known that she's not one of them. So she takes her journey alone. And anybody who's taking a journey alone, it's fraught with all sorts of doubt, all sorts of self-hate. But she goes because she thirsts. And thirst is something that keeps us moving, even when we don't understand why we're moving, and even when we don't know what we're thirsting for. But in this particular case, she thinks it's water, because that's what it's been. And so she begins her journey, and she hefts her things up, and she begins the journey to the well. And who does she see on her way before she can quite clear her own home? But those women who were at the well early. And women in the room, you know how we can be sometimes, right? When we have excluded someone from our midst, and the things that we say when we are pretending to whisper. But we really are not whispering because we want the person to hear. Oh, that heifer goes. I can't stand her. She always doing something. Look at how she dressed. And we say these things, not knowing what it does to the person who's hearing them. And so she hears these things again. And some of these things she believes, and she thinks, well, if I turn around, then I don't have to continue to hear this as I pass them. But she's thirsty. And she has to make it past them to quench her thirst. The well is past them. And so she moves on. She moves on past them because she's got to get to the well But there's another group. There's another group that she is going to encounter, and that's the men. And men, you know how you can be when a beautiful woman is passing you. She really does look nice, doesn't she? You should know you were with her before. She's mine now. Yeah. Wonder how long that's going to last. If I got anything to do with it, I might disrupt that. But she's thirsty. And she pushes on. And she makes it past the women. And she makes it past the men. And she adjusts her yoke because she's like, yeah, now it's easy sailing now, straight to the well. And at this particular well, at this particular time, is a man who sees her coming and says, finally, here she comes. Yes, keep coming. And we all know this particular story. We know Jesus is at the well, and Jesus is at the well beckoning us to come. And sometimes we do come, and sometimes we don't. But he sits at the well and he waits. And he keeps calling to us and asks us to keep coming. And as she gets closer, she sees that there's a man at the well, and she's like, damn. It's somebody at my water source. I have already battled. And I knew it would be empty when I got here. And it's not. But I got a plan. I'll ignore him. I don't even know who he is. I don't even know what that means for me to be going to this well to get my water, and there's some man sitting there. I don't even know what. I'm not going to even think about that. I'm going to just go get my water. And so she has a plan, right? Have you ever had a plan when you knew Jesus was around, but you had a plan? And so she had a plan, and she gets there, and she drops everything, and she's getting ready to get into the well to get her water. And Jesus says, hey, can I get a drink? And she pauses just for a minute to be like, is he? No, he's not. Yes, perhaps. Now let me keep going. And as if I keep going, then he'll. And so she keeps going, and he was like, excuse me, I know you heard me. May I get a drink? And at this particular time, she is just exasperated, right? Because it's like, I have passed the women. I have passed the men. It's hot. I get to this well, and this guy is here talking about, can he have a drink? And so her response is, you've been sitting here all this time. I watched you as I was walking up. Why didn't you get your own water? You wait for me to show up to serve you? And Jesus says, well, yeah, well, you know. Perhaps. But that's all right. I don't need that water from the well anyway. I got some water. I got something that, because I noticed you was thirsty. I have something that will quench your thirst. Make you forget about this well. Now, it's interesting about Jesus, right? Jesus says some things in our lives that sometimes just don't make any sense whatsoever. The woman is coming to the well to get water for a thirst that she knows about. Water quenches a thirst. There's somebody at the well talking about, can you give me a drink? Then flips the script and starts talking about, well, I got something that will quench your thirst that you would never have to drink from. Dude, what planet are you from? And if you had it, why was you asking me for this water from the well? Why are you really bothering me? Has Jesus disrupted your life like that? So I'm wondering at this point what she's thinking, right? And so she was like, you know what? I'm tired anyway. Let me sit down and go. Say what it is you got to say so I can go ahead about what I'm doing. And so then Jesus begins to chat with her and talk with her about her life. And she stops him somewhere midway and say, look, I don't need you to rehash all the negative things that I've done, all the bad decisions that I've made, all the mess that I've made of my particular life. I don't need you, some stranger. Matter of fact, I think you, a Jew. Anyway, we're not going to get into that. But I don't need you telling me about me. I know that. And Jesus said, well, just pause a minute. I'm only recapping so that you know that you have been forgiven of everything. I'm talking about something new for you. And so now she can relax and she can really get into the conversation. And she's really in this conversation now about what newness can be in her life. Have you ever thought about when Jesus says something into your life, what that newness could be? The possibilities that can begin to pop into your mind. Well, this is what was happening to her. So much so that she didn't notice that the fellas was coming back, because you remember the fellas had dropped him at the well to go get something to eat, and the fellas are coming back, and she looks up and she was like, oh no, that's way too many guys here. I need to go, right? And so she's thinking about that, but she's in this conversation. Now we know the fellas and how they are and how their minds are working can't even seem to realize that they're walking with Jesus. Oh, am I talking about us who can't seem to know that we're walking with Jesus? And I'm putting it on them. Oh, or is it us? But in that particular group, they say stuff like, is he over there talking to a woman at the, what? It's just the two of them? Is she a Samaritan too? Like, somebody need to tell him that he's not supposed to do that. I'm not telling him. You tell him, I'm not telling him. Can you imagine amongst that group how they kept passing that baton to somebody else? Like, you go tell him that he's not supposed to do that? And somebody said, well, you know, I thought we've been telling him that he wasn't supposed to do stuff, but he keep doing stuff that... And so then they was like, Peter, you know, you the rock, you ought to go tell him. And so at this particular time, she decides, I need to go. I don't know what's happening here, but I need to go. And she goes back with a fervor. Where does she go back? Back to the same people who talked about her like a dog when she was passing through. But the interesting thing about this is that when you go back with Jesus, you can face anything. When you go back with what Jesus has planted within your heart, you can do anything. And she goes back with the word of salvation. Let me tell you about the man I just met who is the Messiah. Now, the interesting thing about what Jesus does for you is that Jesus prepares the people to hear. Now, remember, these are the same people that she passed who talked about her. But with a word of praise on her lips, people can hear that and they can be transformed. Part of this is all about, we don't need to judge the audience. We don't need to know whether or not they're going to receive the message. That's not our job. Our job is to be the messenger. Our job is to deliver whatever Jesus has placed on our heart. Jesus is going to do the rest. We can't get trapped in what are they going to say? How are they going to receive it? What am I supposed to do? This woman showed us that you go back with the praise on your lips, and people will want to know, who is this man, so that I may know him for myself. So the questions I leave with you, who are you in the story? Who are you right now in the story? Or what are you in the story? Are you the women before she made it to the well? Are you the men who before she made it to the well? Are you the well? Are you the yoke that she was carrying when she went to the well? Are you pressing down on somebody's life not being of any use? Or did you get left at the well? Are you part of the gaggle of people who had gone to get lunch and are finally coming back and they're looking at Jesus trying to figure out like who's going to tell him what he needs to do? Could you be the woman? Could you be the hot sun blazing down, creating discomfort? Who are you? And where is Jesus?
Let the people say amen. Amen. Next we have Carolyn Medine from the University of Georgia.
The boring part.
Right? Yeah, there's a lot more, but I'll let her tell you. But I'll just add that I wouldn't have gotten through grad school without her. So we are both veterans at the University of Virginia.
I'm teaching Nathan Scott right now. So, all right, y'all. I usually have graduate students to deal with anything technological. So I'm going to try to deal with technology as I do this. We'll see what happens. When Toni Morrison was 12, she was looking for a church. Growing up in multi-ethnic Lorain, Ohio, she knew many different kinds of people. And one friend suggested to Morrison that she come to the Catholic Church, saying, "We take everybody." The "we take everybody," well, you know what they were dealing with was her skin. The "we take everybody," I think, joins in Morrison's thought with the search for lost things, which is the specialization of her patron saint, St. Anthony of Padua. Catholicity means for Morrison that all diasporic Africans, everyone, living, dead, lost, named, found, can be located. For Morrison, through the imagination. But it also joins with the sense, I think, that she talked about in The Origin of Others, of black people being tampered with. She said her pitch black grandmother, on seeing Toni and her siblings, said, "These children have been tampered with." They were to Morrison's grandmother not just lighter skinned, but sullied inside. This tampering began, of course, as multi-ethnic Africans were formed into products called slaves in the crucible of the Middle Passage. And Morrison's search for these lost ones in the altered world, and her desire to create an altar so that this pain can be addressed and possibly healed, marks her work. But it also led one critic to remark that though Morrison's work often centers around religious themes, we have to ask if she's explicitly a Catholic writer. And the critic concluded that depends on how we define the term. The term might be said to concern the Catholic imagination itself. To discuss this, I want quickly to review notions about the Catholic imagination, and then to offer two Black African significations on this imagination: the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina and Morrison's deployment of sound in Beloved. Father Richard Blake in Afterimage suggests that the Catholic imagination has three theological footprints. First, sacramentality, God is present in the world through creation. Second, mediation, the conviction that God works through people to people and through his creation to people. And as a Franciscan, I'm going to say through people to the creation. And third, communion or community, that people find salvation through and with others. Blake builds on David Tracy's sense that the Catholic imagination is analogical, a mode of imagining that seeks through metaphor to find similarity in difference, in contrast, as Father Richard McBrien puts it, to a more Protestant dialectical imagination. Though we fall into a kind of pantheism, I think Tracy would argue that there is a need for some dialectic because, as the Catechism teaches us, for example, the imagination is something that has to be disciplined. Jesus, as the primary analog, is the the Logos through whom we creatively reinterpret and critically correlate the human situation in light of the event of Christ. This calls us in space to a unique attention to particularity within the constraints of time, because we're beings located in time and space, through which a way to beauty and wisdom is laid open. As Nathan A. Scott Jr. puts it in The Poetics of Belief, analogy lets ratio, discursive logical thought, be complemented by intellectus, a contemplative gaze onto reality that spends its energy listening to the essence of things. The Black Catholic imagination, however, falls on a kind of analogical fault line. It's attempting to exercise a religious consciousness based on the fractures of the Middle Passage, slavery, Jim Crow, the struggle for citizenship and humanity in America, constructed around what Morrison calls the new white man, exercising his authority, autonomy, and absolute control. Therefore, we have to take seriously Charles Long's reminder that the African American is an involuntary presence in America, was a victim of the terror of history, but not passively. The Black Catholic imagination did not take anything, even Christianity, as some static horizon. It used and adapted what was at hand, and in these improvisations, the Black imagination created on the break, in its position as a radical contradiction to the dominant culture, as an unacknowledged yet absolutely important part of the dominant culture, and in doing so produce new cultural forms and understandings of Enlightenment notions like freedom and individuality, and of religion like Catholicism. So what did Africans bring? I think it's almost impossible to know what constituted pre-African religions, but Africans did not work off a blank slate. The prevailing ideas of African religions as having a supreme being who presides over a community of deities and as involving ancestors and sacrifice provided a ground for the function of the analogical imagination between Africans and their enslavers. Peter Paris in Virtues and Values, the African American Experience, suggests that Africans in the diaspora brought with them four constitutive and interdependent spheres of African experience: God, community, family, and person. Paris concludes that this interdependence suggests a sacramental view of life and corresponds with an understanding of the interdependence of the realms of spirit, history, and nature, understandings which could be analogically aligned with Catholicism. So what forms did this Black Catholic imagination take? I want to suggest two. First, that the Black Catholic imagination resists bondage and loss of freedom, and I'll use the Stono Rebellion of 1739 to talk about that. And second, that artistically it is expressed in sound for Toni Morrison. So first, the Stono Rebellion. John Thornton, along with Mark Smith, see the Catholicism that was the official religion of the Kingdom of Congo driving the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina in 1739. It was led by a man named Jimmy and a corps of some 20 Angolan slaves. And according to the account, these slaves were Catholic. This is disputed by some people. They began the rebellion on May 9th, the feast of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The rebels carried white flags, Smith argues as a sign of surrender, but one celebrating Mary. They were trying to escape to Florida, to which a lesser-known underground railroad ran. Escaped slaves are mentioned in records as early as 1687, escaping to St. Augustine, where the only condition imposed upon their seeking sanctuary was that they convert to Catholicism. So there, a Creole Catholic culture, including Catholicism, developed. The Stono Rebellion shows us that Africans were shaping the Catholic imagination as one centered on the understanding of the promise of the gospel as freedom, what our preacher there told us. The Stono Rebellion claimed it, not carrying white flags. This worried me a long time. They are carrying banners.
Thank you.
We Catholics love our stuff, and they are carrying banners like we carry in procession. When we process with cross and banner, we go back to our Roman roots. Everywhere Rome went with their banners was Rome. And bringing that into the pilgrim journey of the church in the world toward the altar. They were carrying their insignia. In other words, the rebels flew, and my deacon husband told me, be careful, flew their colors. They were making a public statement that wherever we carry this flag, our mother is with us.
Thank you.
These images, as I hope I've showed briefly, are tampered with, but they suggest the process of the Black Catholic imagination in this creativity within the terror of history, opening up a space of freedom. A word about sound. A second element of the Black imagination of making tampering into agency that Morrison explores in her novels is sound. As W.E.B. Du Bois, Paul Gilroy, and others have argued, for African Americans, sound constitutes a multivalent discourse that addresses every element of Black human life. In The Ship's Hole, the African American sound was forged from the shrieks of women, the groans of the dying, the cries of baby being born, the coughing of the ill, the sounds of mourning, and the attempts at connection and consolation. We experience this complex sound in Toni Morrison's Beloved as the 30 women converge on 124. They use this tampering to face down what they think is evil and to save the main character, Setha. What they bring is African and American. They brought what they could and what they believed would work. Stuffed in apron pockets, strung around their necks, their asafoetida bags, their stuff, lying in the space between their breasts. Others brought Christian faith as shield and sword. Most brought a little bit of both. They come ready to improvise. All right, now here's where I usually have a graduate student. So we're going to try this. It's not going to open it. All right. They come ready to improvise. Don't worry about it. They had no idea what they would do once they got there. Once they get to 124, Ella, one of the characters in the neighborhood, remembers her time as a sexual slave of the lowest yet, and Ella hollered.
Yes.
Is it a field holler? What is it? This, as Morrison has said, is pain. And where there is pain, there are no words. It is also outrage. It's refusal. It's a no. But at the same time, it gathers. Instantly, the kneelers and the standers joined her. They stopped praying and took a step back to the beginning. In the beginning, there were no words. In the beginning was the sound. And they all knew what that sound sounded like. The voices of the women searched for the right combination. Oh, it's not going to let me open it. Well, y'all, we're going to have to just try here. The voices of the women searched for the right combination, the key, the code, the sound that broke the back of words, building voice upon voice until they found it. And when they did, it was a wave of sound, wide enough to sound deep water and knock the pods off chestnut trees. It broke over Setha, and she trembled like the baptized in his wash. I didn't grow up Catholic, but I do know what the sound sounded like. I wish I could play it for you here, but it's decided it's not going to do it for me. In the Black Primitive Baptist Church where my great-grandmother was in church, my mother used to always laugh and say people could not sing. And I don't know if we got any singers here, but some people might be able to do it with me. But you would hear the call, and then this chorus of voices would come in. Nobody's on tune, right? It's just these voices, they're coming in. And this is the process, right? They are searching for the right combination, searching for the key, the code, the sound that will break the back of words. This sound is African and American, Catholic and African traditional in Morrison's novel. It's the pain of the past and a hope for the future. It's all coming together in what Morrison calls a fixing ceremony. It's fracture seeking harmony on a pentatonic scale, going back to the older roots of the Greek and the African, the scale that is the basis of blues and spiritual. It's the sound like the Gregorian chant in Mass. It signals that altered space, fallen space, may become an altered space, right? It initiates a fixing ceremony, the repetition that creates, a copy that originates. Morrison reinterprets the Gospel of John using the Black Catholic imagination. Logos here is so layered in Morrison's work. It's Jesus, he's there, but it's also story taking shape, a creative sound that, in the old Greek sense of logos, gathers the pieces that have been scattered out, which is Toni Morrison's name and her project. The Catholic imagination, therefore, plays its part in forming the Black imagination, and its sense of an oikumene suggested a new scope of belonging, but also for Africans in America, a new scope of not belonging. This belonging was compromised when the analogical imagination collided with not essence, but alterity. The flag and the sound signal tampering and improvisation. For Morrison, you have to use violence to undo violence, double consciousness to undo double consciousness. In other words, you have to go back through what you've been through and give it a form. A doubleness that is the Black imagination and the Black Catholic imagination. Morrison says that it draws from something closer to the edge, but that edge is already in the master narrative. Yet we all need to stop, listen to it, and form a more perfect and inclusive human future through that listening. The church, too, must honor the trace of the white flag in the vanished sound. Mother Church existed in a paradox, both tampering and taking everybody. Standing on that site of paradox together, perhaps we can make a more complex and truly Catholic future that answers the challenge that Sister Thea Bowman offered to the church. I quote, "I'm not asking you, Mother Church, to be any more than you say you are."
Thank you.
Amazing grace indeed. For our final speaker, we have Joseph Brown of the Society of Jesus and also on the faculty at the University of Southern Illinois, Carbondale.
The biographical information in the book is not complete, but it's enough for you to know. And I said just now, this is not my fault. The three of us have never discussed any of the particulars of what we're going to talk about. And quite often when I do these presentations, I will do them in an improvisational way. But because it's before 11 o'clock in the morning, I didn't think I could trust my improvisational skills without soiling something. So I'm going to read this, but it is a performance piece. And again, those who were at Paul Mariani's evocation last night, I had done this before I ever got there. And you will hear repetitions from the previous two speakers. And you will hear call and response because this is written in multiple voices because my therapist said I'll get over it someday. And God said, of course God said, "Darkness you shall not prevail, there will be light." Creation begins with a word spoken with the power to make things and to make things happen. Yes, Ashe. Make it so. The power within all that has been created. Before anything was created, there was the power. There was and is and will always be the Word. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. What they were drowning in the bottom of the wooden vessel, rocking on water that could also drown them, water that was now to be a forever locked gate to the only strength they had ever known, where the ancestors, the living dead, wept for their being ripped away from the earth where they had learned to dance, and it was dark. The evil ones proved their clever genius in how they broke even the bonds of words. From Equiano, We were landed up a river a good way from the sea, about Virginia County, where we saw few or none of our native Africans and not one soul who could talk to me. I was a few weeks weeding grass and gathering stones in a plantation, and at last all my companions were distributed different ways, and only myself was left. I was now exceedingly miserable and thought myself worse off than any of the rest of my companions, for they could talk to each other, but I had no person to speak to that I could understand. In this state, I was constantly grieving and pining and wishing for death rather than anything else. No words, but crying and moaning and the groans of wide-awake night, always, never broken night. From Vincent Harding. Then late at night, after the songs were over, from the darkness of the lower decks of the young Hero and 1,000 other ships, the sailors could hear an owling, melancholy noise expressive of extreme anguish. On one such occasion, the ship's doctor said that he asked his black female interpreter to go inquire the cause of the wailing noise. According to the doctor, she discovered it to be owing to their having dreamt that they were in their own country and finding themselves when awake in the hold of a slave ship. And God said, and in the conviction bestowed in them at birth they sang. Each utterance shaped the universe, resisted the darkness, word, sound, sounding truth, speaking no to the destructive trauma of darkness, erasing the circle of all that was truth and evident. We are born, we grow, we bless and are blessed. We teach, we descend into a darkness where we are named, blessed, called forth through the gateway of the night to protect those who sleep. We are bringers of peace. No, the circle was forever destroyed. This we knew, but we could only sound the anguish being separated from the words that allowed us to live. And so we live. They named us dead, and yet we howled and sang, and year by burning year we found a word, then more, then many, and we shape the circle being completed once more. They brought storms into our sky and into our minds, and the howling we have done is nothing but the howling we have been burned by. Flinging the darkness up and away from us, we are the ancestors of the children yet unborn. Every song draws someone, one, by we, into the circle where they and we can learn who they and we have always been. Toni Morrison. For a long time, the art form that was healing for Black people was music. That music is no longer exclusively ours. We don't have exclusive rights to it. Ain't that the truth? Somebody stole all my stuff, father, brother, uncle, cousin, Langston said. Other people sang it and sing it and play it. It is the mode of contemporary music everywhere. So another form has to take that place. And it seems to me that the novel is needed by African Americans now in a way that it was not needed before. And it is following along the lines of the function of novels everywhere. So we gotta do the soul food thing again, magic again. Take the leftovers and cook them up so good and delicious that we can feed a neighborhood of strangers. We don't live in places where we can hear those stories anymore. Parents don't sit around and tell their children those classical, mythological, archetypal stories that we heard years ago. But new information has got to get out. And there are several ways to do it. One is the novel. I regard it as a way to accomplish certain very strong functions. It should be beautiful and powerful, but it should also work. It should have something in it that enlightens, something in it that opens the door and points the way, something in it that suggests what the conflicts are, what the problems are. But it need not solve those problems because it is not a case study. It is not a recipe. There are things to be incorporated that should be directly and deliberately related to what I regard as the major characteristics of Black art, wherever it is. One of which is the ability to be both print and oral literature. To combine those two aspects so that the stories can be read in silence, of course, but one should be able to hear them as well. It should try deliberately to make you stand up and make you feel something profoundly in the same way that a Black preacher requires her congregation to speak, to join her in the sermon, to behave in a certain way, to stand up and to weep and to cry and to exceed or to change and to modify, to expand on the sermon that is being delivered. And having at my disposal only the letters of the alphabet and some punctuation. I have to provide the places and spaces so that the reader can participate, because it is the effective and participatory relationship between the artist or the speaker and the audience that is of primary importance, as it is in those other art forms that I have described. Oh, so what you mean is that Black literature is sacramental. It achieves the effect that is intended. It has the power to make the stranger a neighbor, neighbors a community, and communities a culture. Is that what you mean, Ms. Morrison? Is there anything else we need to know for this time and space and place and purpose? Anything about the original artists through their ability to be mystics in the truest sense of the word, becoming the angels that traverse Jacob's ladder and not the trashy individual caught up in their dreams? Learning to demand that God come down from heaven and liberate those who groan and cry and mourn and weep, making their voices the primal and primary therapeutic response to the enduring trauma inflicted on them all. Being thoroughly assured that their wings were going to fit them well because they tried them on at the gates of hell. Of becoming Moses, Joshua, Daniel, Elijah, Mary, Martha, John the Baptist, Peter, and even the silent abused Savior, in other words. The carriers of the voice of God, like all good prophets are. I'm sorry, Miss Morrison. Is there anything else you want to tell us about how the art you conjure up is so closely aligned with the principles of sacramental theology that we can grin and wallow in your generous teaching? Is there? Oh, okay. The only thing I would add is the presence of the ancestor. It seems to me interesting to evaluate Black literature on what the writer does with the presence of the ancestor, which is to say a grandfather as in Ralph Ellison, or a grandmother as in Toni Cade Bambara, or a healer as in Bambara and Henry Dumas. There is always an elder there. And these ancestors are not just parents. They are sort of timeless people whose relationships to the characters are benevolent, instructive, and protective, and they provide a certain kind of wisdom. Yes, ma'am, saints. The living dead of the Congo culture. The visitors of our dreams and daydreams. The interpreters, guides, angels, and guides. The intercessors, guides, angels, and guides. The saints. When the survivors of the ocean voyage stepped on the earth that would be their prison, they decided that as soon as they learned the language of those who enslaved them, they would use that language to free themselves. They stole the book that starts with darkness and sound, with the word of power, and they named themselves the liberating heroes of the stories held dear by those who sought to control them. And they said, never been to heaven, but I've been told the streets of heaven are paved with gold. When I get to heaven, I'm going to sing and shout, and there'll be nobody there to turn me out. And everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Yes, ma'am, and all the ma'ams and sirs, you have taught us to see and hear prophetic literature, and we are grateful. And that is why we love you all, by giving us your art and becoming our ancestors. You have taught us to know and to love the gifts you show us to be. Without ever leaving the ground, you could fly. To fly without ever leaving the ground in the world of the Spirit. Amen. She's gonna play the song.
We're going to start.
You don't even understand a word they're saying, but the spirit is in that music, isn't it? And you hear traces of it in, like, my husband likes the TV show Justified, and in the music that opens it, the Afro-Lation rap, I hear the same sound. You just hear that sound. It goes through our culture, right? And my heart always goes, yay! But I guess the other people just say, oh, that's good music. Thank you, Timone.
So, one of the privileges Carolyn and I had in graduate school was to be able to escort Albert Murray to Monticello. We saw a remarkable performance while we were there of signification, which all of our speakers have either alluded to or demonstrated. And I remember something he told us on that day after the docent repeatedly insisted that Mr. Jefferson had servants and not slaves. He turned to Carolyn and I, and first what he did was, and then he said to the docent, how much did they get paid? These servants. And so afterwards, when we're coming out of Monticello and thinking about this experience, he turned to us and he said, you can't slay a dragon with a formula. And I think that this is what we have seen this morning, that the Black Catholic imagination is a demonstration of that principle, that you don't slay a dragon with the formula. So, following the theme of Mr. Murray, one of my heroes, we have the opportunity now to extend, elaborate, and refine what we have heard here today, which he says is the African American Aesthetic Project. It's jazz. So what kind of sounds do y'all want to make? Questions, comments for our speakers, or more performances?
I have a question.
Please.
Davis is very taken with that idea. But I read elsewhere, particularly in the writings of James Allison, when you have Jesus say, and went all over that, in order to tell you, you are forgiven, right? What I mean is that the message isn't, well, you go do bad things, and then you confess them, and then you're forgiven. The way you run that, which I found paradoxical, but more appealing, is that the forgiveness is there already. Is that your idea?
That is my idea.
Right. That's counter to the dialectical idea that, well, you do bad things, and you're sorry about them, so you ask for forgiveness. That's a very big and very different idea, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So
Yeah.
the way I'm understanding Jesus' salvation is that we are already forgiven.
Yeah.
We just need to know it. And then once we know it, we live through that forgiveness.
No, the reason, because with regard very particularly to the last speaker, I'm reminded of the statement of James Baldwin, that, he's really fighting for the soul of America. It was very clear in those magnificent essays, and not just saving the black man, for the soul of America. And he also says that this idea of the white majority population, they didn't have slaves, they're innocent. And he said, the innocence is the crime.
Yes.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to connect, and I don't ask you to do that here, but I mean, this is just firing me up. You have that idea that the profession of innocence, I don't need forgiveness. That's what Mitch McConnell said out there, and everybody says. And this need we have is forgiveness, this thirst for forgiveness. You say, what's already there? Am I right?
So when I started off talking about the this comment, I think, so batteries did. When I started off talking about the thirst,
Yeah.
right? She doesn't know what she's thirsty for. She only knows what has quenched the thirst in the past. That was water in the past. So she's driven on by a thirst that water in the past has been quenching, but it's not solving it. What happens when Jesus is talking about what I have, you will never be thirsty, is this whole complexity of what I give to you covers everything. You won't be thirsty, so now you understand that you're filled, but now you have to go back and live that out. Well, what does that look like? What does that look like for you to live out that you are a forgived being? And you bump up against other people who don't know that or don't want to acknowledge that.
I mean, I think Morrison talks about this American innocence as sort of infantile. It refuses to acknowledge the experience it's participated in or the benefits of that experience. And so when, I'm teaching I'm the director of the Institute for African American Studies at Georgia, and in the intro course you always get, well, I never owned any slaves. And I say, well, okay, but the system that the slaveocracy set up is one that, by sitting here at the University of Georgia, where we just uncovered a burial behind one of our buildings and quickly moved those bodies and put up a plaque, is one that you're benefiting from. And the way, I think, to what you're talking about is through the experience. It's not around it.
When I told you all before I started that it wasn't my fault, that I had written all this out without knowing what either one of them was going to say. But last night at dinner, we were talking about films she hasn't seen, especially Beloved. And I said, thank God you didn't. Because I think Toni Morrison was in some bad emotional, psychological, and financial space. And she let Oprah Winfrey get the rights to that film. and Oprah Winfrey changed the entire theme of the novel. Because the people who were jealous of Setha and baby Suggs for being happy that they were reunited, the circle made whole. For everybody else, when the slave catchers would come through that neighborhood, they would warn them. They would send out a voice signal, be careful, they're coming for you. But when they came for Setha and her children, they kept silent. And that was their sin. That was their deliberate, conscious sin. So when she went magnificent on us in her talk about the circle that had to come around that house and sing away the trauma, the depression, the scarring, the abuse that Setha and all of them had endured, they found their voice. And that is the theme that Morrison is teaching all of us. Your silence can destroy others, but your sound can heal them. And I was so grateful that we talked about what I can't stand about Beloved. And she brings up exactly the whole thing about the enslaved in the ships sounding, but that circle of sound, and that's what we're going through in this country right now. And every time the Black voice has been uttered in any kind of community, as Bernice Reagan says in that wonderful documentary, interview she did in 1991 with Bill Moyers, sound, songs are a way of running sound through your body. And she talks about how every generation has their sound, their song. But you gotta have it, because this was how they came off the ship long before anybody ever defined post-traumatic stress disorder, because I don't believe it's post. And they started running the sound through them in order to be healed enough to get to the next day and out in the fields, in the kitchens, in the cabins. When somebody's being raped in the house and people next door in the next cabin are singing some sound just to keep him or her quiet or hopeful. That's the beginning of Black culture. The resistance, the persistence, and the transcendence. Do something. Oh, there's a hand in the back.
Yeah, let me take this back here so everyone can hear.
Thank you so much. This is very powerful. The woman at the well who was always already forgiven, she was marginalized. So I guess my question is, isn't there a different type of forgiveness that she sought without realizing that she needed, versus the type of forgiveness that the Pharisees would need, or the young man who wouldn't sell his wares? And so bringing it to today, we talk about forgiveness and national healing and coming to reckoning with our own sins and history. But isn't there a different quality of forgiveness that is sought or needed or available for the oppressor and the oppressed?
The notion of forgiveness, as I have been tired of going around talking about reparations, especially since the Georgetown 272 events were publicized so well in the New York Times and elsewhere. And as I've said, even on this campus, when we had a Jesuit gathering about 4 or 5 years ago, I don't want to hear about reparations until you understand that we've always had that in the Catholic Church. It starts off with, Father, forgive me, for I have sinned. And I've never heard anybody say that yet. So it's really hard for me to offer forgiveness. My spiritual director, who was also the head of our theology program when I was being told I was too dumb to be made a priest, told me that the hardest thing I would ever have to do is to forgive people who didn't even know they had sinned. And I have since changed that. If I have to know, you have to know. And when we get into the hypocrisy, which is America, they were conscious. Thomas Jefferson said, I tremble when I consider that my God is just, and being just has no part in our endeavor. He knew he was sinning. He could be as deist as he wanted to be, but he knew it. Ralph Waldo Emerson wakes up in the middle of the night talking about the nightmares because he's afraid to speak out the way Henry David Thoreau was able to speak out against enslavement and the progress of slavery through the Mexican-American War. They have always known. So I don't want to tell anybody there's a different method of forgiveness for one person or another. In my understanding of black theology, there's no such thing as original sin except you enslaved me. Now, if I want to forget how God delivered me from the lion's den, then I have sinned the same way the original Hebrews had. You forgot your liberator. But we were told that because of your blackness, you carry the mark of sin. No, we don't, because you don't even know how to read the story of Cain and Abel. He put a mark on Cain so he would be saved. But all the lies that get told to justify the hypocritical denial of what they are conscious of, that's where the sin is. Now, if I make a mistake, if I forget and doubt that God is more powerful than the people who are enslaving me or oppressing me, then yes, I need to be forgiven for that. But I don't need to go to confession. I need to go down to the waterside and be reminded of where my Savior is. But the sin of America is the one we have to keep talking about, because it's so easy for people to say, well, what about black on black crime? Well, you all got guns, and I don't see no gun manufacturers in the south side of Chicago. They came from somewhere. And I also don't see how anybody's talking about, I've noticed this, about some of the greatest jazz music performances of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. If you ever listen to a great black jazz female singer, you can't hear their songs much anymore because they're almost always about accepting spousal abuse. So many of the great jazz classics are about abuse. It costs me a lot, but there's one thing that I got, it's my man. 2 or 3 girls has he. And on and on and on, song after song. They're singing about stuff I can't accept anymore. But America has never healed itself of the greatest American hero we ever had in popular culture was John Wayne. On Pat Robertson's Family Channel, they show movies where all of the solutions to most of the major problems in the Westerns are to kill somebody. To be vigilantes, to be posses, to be lynchers, and to kill people. That's the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. Put into the Constitution as a response to the Stono Rebellion and the other 40 or 50 rebellions that had happened before 1787. They knew what they were doing. And the same reason for the Second Amendment back then was to have a gun at the ready so when the bell rang, we could go out there and shoot them Stono people or those natives who are coming back to take the land we stole from them. That's the same reason that justifies the Second Amendment today. I'm sorry. If I have to know, you have to know. If I'm not exempt, you're not exempt. And that's the way I preach to people who want to be, well, I don't know what to do. Last thing. Okay, so you didn't have slaves. Let me tell you a story I always say to my students. I came home about 4 nights ago, and I found out that somebody broke in my house and stole my TV set. I am so upset that I just don't know what to do. And I've been going all over the neighborhood telling everybody about how upset I am about somebody stole my TV set. And I walk into cousin Leroy's house, and there's my TV set. And he swears he didn't steal it, but he bought it off somebody who did. It's still my TV set. And Leroy, you still responsible for stealing, for taking control of stolen goods. That's what America is about. Well, we didn't steal your TV set, but you playing off of it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get all head up, but the man kind of warmed me up.
I guess I would only add that this is Levinas and Toni Morrison talking together, that it's hard to think outside totalities. And I think the kind of example you just gave might help people to think outside of totalities. I mean, Levinas talks about totality and infinity, and the total systems so mask the horror. Like Alan Tate said, civilization is the agreement slowly arrived at to leave the abyss alone. And so I think the totality so perfectly masks the kind of intricacy of relationship that you're talking about here, that it's difficult to step outside of it, and it's costly. So I don't know, I was trying to think, do I think the oppressor and the oppressed need different forgiveness? I'm not sure, but I do agree. I think we all need to be able to try to step outside those totalities and see where we really stand.
Inherent in your question was the existence of hierarchy. My response is that salvation eliminates hierarchy. So do the Pharisees get a different type of forgiveness than the woman at the well? Says to me that does the white person need a different type of forgiveness than the black person? Well, why would we even bother with trying to dissect forgiveness? Forgiveness or salvation says all. Right? And so for me, my understanding of God is that God is about all of us, and that forgiveness reminds us that it's about all of us, and that it's not just about me. My problem with that is the hierarchy of sin. Sin is sin. If it turns you away from God, you are turned. Well, I don't know. Did you walk 2 steps when you turned? Did you do a half step when you turned? I mean, you just are not with God. And that forgiveness says, hey, I've cleared a path for you to be back. I can't say whether you should have your path cleared or not. The way I understand it is that if your path is not cleared, then neither is mine. Is that what that is? So I guess we all going. Okay.
What other questions do we have?
But it's almost time.
Yeah, now don't let us start getting to the door and we trying to go on to the next thing, and you be like, so what I wanted to say.
Oh,
Trying to make it private.
oh, people wouldn't do that, would they?
No, they wouldn't.
He's saying, don't ask me at the door. All right. Thank you all so very much.